Raptors general manager Bobby Webster spoke out following yesterday's trade deadline and revealed that more moves are coming for the Toronto Raptors with their two open roster spots. So we'll break down his comments along those lines, as well as answering some of the questions that Raptors fans definitely had following the trade deadline. Because obviously, major moves were made, major decisions were made this trade season. A bunch of deals ended up happening, but there are some players that are on the roster that were rumored, reported to be potentially shopped around, to be potentially packaged in a Toronto Raptors trade, but that ended up not being the case. So Webster spoke out on all of that, so we're going to break down all of his comments in today's video. But folks, over 56% of our viewers are not subscribed to the channel, and we want to keep you up to date with all the latest Toronto Raptors news, reports, coverage. So if you want to stay up to date with this team, definitely hit that subscribe button. But let's dive into Bobby Webster had to say, because again, this is without a doubt the craziest trade season for the Toronto Raptors, and even though major decisions were made, a lot of major questions are now brought up as well in terms of the future for this team. Are we tanking or not? The Kelly Olynyk deal seemed like we're not sort of going down that downward trajectory, but then also dealing away Dennis Schroeder and moving into a younger direction definitely indicates that being the case. So lots of sort of things that need to be answered from Bobby Webster. So let's start breaking down some of his quotes from this year's trade deadline. So basically, Webster reiterated that their intention was never to use all 3 or 4 of their picks in 2024. Used one of them to get a good young player with 1.5 seasons already under his belt. Abaji, he's a guy that's hardworking, he's high character, he's a two-way player, and we're getting a young talent with a lot of upside. So in Bobby Webster's sort of press conference, he really discussed how difficult it is to develop, a huge one player just on its own, but, a crop of young guys sort of coming in, getting acclimated to the NBA, coming out of college and stuff. It's a major transition, or wherever they're coming from, stepping into the NBA. So the Raptors having really 4 or potentially 4 first round picks. We'll see how that first round pick, and he kind of let it slide, or 3 or 4 picks, in 2024 first rounds. He says 4 if you include that Detroit Pistons second, which is the first. Maybe he's letting it slip that he expects the Raptors to get that top 6 pick in this year's NBA draft, but I won't read too much into that. But basically what Bobby Webster sort of indicating that it made sense to sort of, obviously trade that first round pick for something valuable, something that's going to be, a young piece. And even though there's that unpredictable upside, and we already seen a little bit of Baji in the NBA, so it's not like, something shocking is going to come immediately, him stepping into a Toronto Raptors uniform, but you don't have to go through those steps of easing the transition of a younger rookie coming into play. So that's sort of comments there regarding the decision to trade away a first round pick, despite, likely definitely going into a retooling stage, but, trying to get younger, try to go into that space. So that was the logic behind that deal right there. Additionally, he came out and discussed how Webster was asked if their preference was to keep the top 6 pick in the 2024, draft that they owe to the San Antonio Spurs. And he basically said, we're going to prioritize seeing this group play. If it ends up that way and we're in the top 6, sure. But especially with the way the new NBA rules are, to try and game that doesn't make any sense. So, he doesn't want to go out there, purposely lose games, purposely just sack the season and things along those lines. What Bobby Webster wants to do is look at this group. I mean, adding Kelly Olynyk to the mix, there's a world, where we could see this team completely have a little 180 in terms of the trajectory that they've been going, pursuing the Toronto tank for 2024 and have a bit of floor spacing in the front court. Jakob Poeltl's back in the lineup. This team looks a heck of a lot different with a healthy Jakob Poeltl in this lineup. So bolstering the front court is definitely something that could potentially change the fortunes of the Toronto Raptors if they, win some games. I'm not saying it's definitely going to be the case by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm not going to be, dumbfounded if that ends up being the case. More likely, the Raptors are going to be on a similar trajectory than they have been in the, previous situation before this trade deadline. There wasn't a dramatic improvement unless Kelly Olynyk or Baji really improved the roster. So we're probably going to stay on that same trajectory. The Raptors aren't going to purposely all-out tank, but they are going to see it. So watch this group sort of develop and shake things out. So that's sort of the direction there regarding that draft pick, because I know a lot of people are invested into that potential draft selection. And then discussing 2 guys that people thought would potentially get traded, Bruce Brown as well as Gary Trent Jr. Webster and Bruce Brown, had we gotten the offers we wanted for Bruce, would have done something At the same time, Bruce is 27. He has a really interesting contract. He provides a professionalism and toughness that we value, and there's options regarding Bruce this summer. And those options are the Raptors have a team option on Bruce Brown for this offseason. So it's a big team option, big money, for Bruce Brown in terms of making $20+ million if we end up bringing him back to the Toronto Raptors or picking up that team deal. So there's that option. So he's not necessarily just an expiring contract. The Raptors have no leverage to keep him as an asset, but if the Raptors sort of want to go the direction of flexibility and letting Bruce walk or make a trade at the trade deadline, but the NBA draft, there are those options there as well. So it's not like the fact that we didn't trade Bruce Brown at the trade deadline, that there's no world where we get any value back from him. There are those options. We could keep him around. Again, Bobby Webster mentioned he's still a relatively young dude, in the NBA sort of sphere, 27 years old, about to enter sort of the prime of his career, is coming off an NBA championship. The Raptors turn things around. He could be a valuable piece. Again, fairly expensive and fairly redundant on the roster, given the number of shooting guards we now have, especially bringing Abaji, but something to look at. Lots of options regarding Bruce Brown. And then for Gary Trent Jr., I think it's a little bit of to be determined on Gary, but we're watching him grow with this group. He pointed out that Gary got off to a disappointing start, but played well as of late. It's a great stretch for us and a great stretch for us to evaluate him. So again, the star boy Gary Trent Jr., he's been shooting over 50% from three, I believe, during January, close to it. His 3-point percentages have definitely increased. He's back to being the star boy where he kind of regressed at the start of this year. Again, Bobby Webster, Masai Ujiri have always not discussed or brought up Gary Trent Jr. as a piece that they seem to view for a major sort of asset for the future, but I always found that weird in press conferences, but now they'll have a chance to evaluate him because he's a guy that has a true elite NBA skill. If he improves on the defensive end, Webster briefly touched on that, how he's bringing it back on the defensive end a little bit as of late. We'll see how all things sort of shake out there with Gary Trent Jr. But next, and this is sort of what the hook of this video was, in the title and stuff, the Raptors plan on making more moves, and this is the thought process behind the Spencer Dinwiddie sort of waiving. Basically, Webster said the decision to waive Dinwiddie was made in the interest of playing their young guys down the stretch of the season and getting Barnes more reps at the point guard spot. He also said they intend to fill their 2 vacant roster spots. So, what does this mean? One, we're getting some Scotty Barnes at the PG spot. Some people have been speculating that Bruce Brown is going to be a backup point guard for this team, and while he did that for the Denver Nuggets, it's not his natural position. He's more of like a point wing and stuff, and Scotty Barnes, I guess, is in that spot as well, but the fact that they addressed Barnes playing more point guard, again, they said at the start of the year, didn't really work out, then we had Schroeder end quickly, so we've regressed away from Barnes playing more PG. That's likely to be the case, that Barnes is going to be running a lot more minutes at the point guard position, and we have 2 roster spots here now at this point. The Raptors have 2 available sort of openings to pick out players either on the buyout market, sign players from Europe, pick up players from the G League, all of these types of things. So Webster's going to use that sort of space, him and Masai Ujiri, evaluate players that might have some potential, might, deserve some opportunities down the stretch of the season, and give him some run. Do I think it's going to be a guard? No, I don't think there's going to be any guards coming back to the Toronto Raptors, given the amount of guards, shooting guards, point guards we have on this team now at this point, but I wouldn't be surprised if some forwards come in, maybe from the Raptors 905. And one guy that I brought up who's been playing really well as of late for the Raptors 905 has been Justice Winslow, who, again, would fit exactly what the Toronto Raptors need positionally, and I think could be an interesting piece if he's able to stay healthy for the Toronto Raptors long term. So he's a piece that I'd be interested in sort of bringing up to the main group. He's a guy that I think could be a cool fit. Fit score to the timeline. Maybe we could convert a 2-way player. I mean, Jonte Porter could go from a 2-way guy to a full roster spot and then maybe bring in another 2-way or something like that. Again, it's hard to speculate given the ocean of players that could potentially come in with one of these roster spots. But let me know who you guys think you'd like to see. I mean, Frank Ntilikina was waived and is an option. Killian Hayes is a guy that was rumored to be attached to the Toronto Raptors leading into the trade deadline. He was cut by the Detroit Pistons, so we'll see how it all shakes out. We'll see how it all goes. Jalen McDaniels ended up surviving my conspiracy theory that he'll get traded to the Pistons, but we'll see how it all goes. But folks, you guys are the best for making it this far. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. Anyways, I'm signing out. Cheers.